Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sunit. As was introduced, I lead the design team at ClearTrip. And today, I will talk about HTML5. Before I get into what HTML5 can do for us and what the new specifications say, I'd like to briefly touch upon why did HTML5, the new specification, come into existence, right? So I think one thing to note is the way we've been consuming content, right? Like has radically changed over the past few years, and we've interacted with our website in a way that we've never done before. In fact, HTML4, the specifications which were written initially, they served for a very, very simple purpose, right? In the sense, fairly static content. It's web developers who actually pushed the boundary forward and actually built stuff that was not even possible, right? So I think keeping that in context is very important. So I think the other interesting is like the amount of time we're spending on online, and the bandwidth that we have today, and also the processing capability of devices and web browsers has completely changed, right? So I think that's very important. I think the other shortcoming of the previous specification, or rather I would say pre-HTML5, right? Pretty much if you had to write a rich internet application or create a rich experiences, you had to pretty much write like custom UI elements, right? You want to do a drag and drop, you want to do sliders and stuff for that, you have to actually write it from scratch. So this basically meant that there's going to be a lot of inconsistency in the ways things are going to behave in different browsers. So I think the other aspect is just the fact that you have to rely on third party applications for, say, video, audio, and even games, right? So this is basically talking about Flash, which is not an open standard, right? So this is where HTML5 comes into picture. So what does HTML5 really mean, right? Like I think one is like HTML5 gives us like a very structured underlay to sort of like deliver content to our customers. All this shiny stuff that you see today, which is possible, which is not possible earlier, we had to rely on like using a lot of heavy images. Today we don't need that, as in we can basically like deliver a much better experience using CSS3 that includes things like you can use web fonts, you can use basically like media queries to like target different devices. Of course, graphics also, with HTML5 you can actually have high-end graphics within the browser. So basically we have a open web graphic library that you can access, and pretty much all that was possible in Flash is possible today on in the browser itself. Audio video, of course, native controls to actually play audio video. You plug in, you basically you plug in a video and it can play right off your browser. And I think the most significant aspect is offline storage, right? So you can actually deliver an experience to your customer probably even when he's not connected, in the sense that if he's visited your site, you can store a lot of information on the client side so that he doesn't have to come back. So that can sort of deliver a much better experience for him. And of course, there's the whole aspect of the fact that you can actually access a lot of the device itself, the hardware, right? So like through the browser, you can find out the location of the customer and deliver an experience that's very, very sort of customized to his location, etc. So, I mean, what does all this mean? I mean, like in terms of like the final delivery, right? The fact that performance is like one of the biggest features of HTML5 is performance. It lets you deliver a really rich experience everywhere, right? So I think today you don't know where your customer is going to actually consume your content. So the fact that HTML5 gives you a native an app experience That too in a browser, that means it can be delivered anywhere, and highly contextual, right? So you can be aware of which device he's like accessing it on, and in location and context in which the person is actually like accessing the content. And all this is possible much easier and faster than it was some time back. I think the biggest question everyone's asking is like, are we ready to use it, right? So, I mean, let me give you a sort of a data point. I mean, I think today we have about 50% of desktop browsers, I mean, desktop and mobile together account for about 50–60% of browsers are already HTML5 compliant, right? So what do you do about the 40% that are not compliant, right? I think one important aspect about HTML5 is HTML5 is like, it's just a progressive enhancement on the previous specification, right? So there's nothing that you can do today in HTML5 that was not possible with your, the old specification. So I think like, if your customers have access to better devices, better capabilities, you shouldn't be shying away to deliver a better experience for them. And obviously, like, you can degrade the experience for like customers who don't have such capable devices. And I think that's the that's the stand we've taken, where we want to deliver the best experience to like people who have good devices, and then gracefully degrade it for everybody else. And I mean, just to give you some examples on how we are using HTML5, we pretty much started using HTML5 2 years back when we launched our mobile site. So right from very simple things that you can do, where, I mean, I was talking about semantics, right? When you put out a form field, you can actually tell that, you can actually specify that you want to capture a number or you want to capture an email, right? So like, when I specify that that form field is a number, I actually get a number dial pad rather than a regular keyboard, right? So the device recognizes it, and then similarly you can do it for emails, and you can do it for other form fields which are like, then this all goes a long way to actually reduce the friction on a mobile experience, right? I think the other thing that we've done with HTML5, which probably wouldn't have been possible otherwise, is the fact that we launched Expressway, which was basically we saved credit card details on your device, so that the next time you came to transact, those credit card details were already available. So we encrypted your credit card details and stored it in the local storage, and this was basically possible at the time when we didn't have PCI compliance. The other places that we are using HTML5 extensively is basically on our mobile side, where we have a hotel search. You could look for, we use geolocation to find out your your location and look for hotels near you. And also, I mean, you can access your trip info even if you're offline. So just imagine a case where you booked a ticket with ClearTrip, and you're sort of traveling, and now you're in a city where you don't have you don't have network, right? You can still access information on your trip info when you don't have internet connection. We've recently rehauled like our entire user account section, and that uses a single page application, and we use a lot of HTML5 elements in there, like for example HT API. So it gives you an app-like experience in a web browser. I don't know if you've followed us, we've actually also like completely revamped our book flow. We are using a lot of shiny CSS3 animations here. So, I mean, talking about coming back to mobile, right, and why HTML5 becomes extremely relevant to mobile specifically. One is Flash is out. I mean, like, no device today is supporting Flash, right? Whoever's supporting are like kind of phasing out support on Flash. And I think all the features that like HTML5 provides, especially on the performance front, like the mobile is the best to benefit from it, right? So, I mean, this is another sort of discussion that I think a lot of people have, right? It's about what do we do? Do we do HTML5? Do we have a HTML5 only mobile site? Or should we basically build apps, for our customer? Um, I mean, before I get into, the HTML5 versus, the native app debate, which is kind of, you cannot have an HTML5 discussion without that. But some examples on who's doing a really good job with pure HTML5, right? Basecamp, I don't know how many of you use Basecamp, which is a project management tool. They are pushing 100% HTML5 apps. They're not building native apps, at least till date, they don't have a native app. Financial Times is one of a great example of, a reasonably good, decent experience on the iPad, 100% HTML5. And another sort of place where HTML5 becomes very relevant is how do we, I think like, being primarily everyone in the service industry, at least like, we basically, we built web products, right? So we are very comfortable with that medium. So the tendency is to actually like try and reuse a lot of our infrastructure to kind of, deliver experiences on the mobile. And there are ways to actually do that. So you have people exploiting the web view. So essentially, web view is like a small little window, which is essentially a browser instance that's available in a native app, right? And people have been building sort of mobile experiences within that, right? So there are two approaches. You can actually have an entire HTML5 app like running straight out of a single window, or then you can basically like go in for a extremely hybrid approach, right? So basically a more integrated approach where you use HTML5 in smaller bits and rely on the native code to kind of handle memory and stuff like that, right? So I think one great example is LinkedIn, right? Like they've kind of built a extremely quality app which is using HTML5 and hybrid iOS and sort of Android together. Just to, look at like our like mobile lineup, right? So we have a Windows Phone app, and we basically first came up with a mobile site. So we've had a mobile site for 2 years. Only after 2 years we actually started building apps, and we've just recently launched our iOS app. And in fact, we have kind of we've built our iOS app with the hybrid approach that I was talking about just now, right? So this is a look at a general sort of like structure of how our iOS app works, right? So we have a shell that's, all our views are talking to each other in native, and then basically we have like our UI, the core UI, which is served as an HTML. So what we've done is we've basically built a JavaScript bridge which talks to native and then renders HTML in the viewport, right? So I think like given the kind of experience or content that we are delivering to our customers today, I think like this approach has worked really well for us. However, I would like to touch upon some of the challenges that like this approach has. So I think the one thing that you need to kind of, if you guys are looking at building an app or looking still evaluating whether you want to go HTML5 or hybrid or whatever that case might be, I think like going hybrid has its own sets of challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is the fact that it is a backdoor entry. It's not like a straightforward sort of method of actually building apps. So it's a workaround, right? So, and I think the other thing is the web view is much slower than browsers itself. So if browsers are improving, right? So if you look at iOS, with every iOS update, Safari is getting faster and faster, right? But like the web view is lagging behind. So I think that itself means that like if you try to build a HTML5 experience inside an app, you're kind of going to like lose on performance a little bit. And the fact that there's always going to be a gap between the browser and native, right? So for example, let's take like Siri, for example, which is voice enabled. If there's an API that comes out which allows app developers to use voice-enabled navigation, for example, I think the browser would be the last one to get that integration. In fact, WebView will be even later than that. And the other thing is you can't really avoid writing native code, right? So if you go hybrid, you got to basically still look at 15–20% of native code. And that also means that at one level you are actually losing out a lot of opportunity of unique capabilities of each, you know, each platform itself, right? Because you kind of have to build something which is for the lowest common denominator. You can't leverage all the capabilities that the device can offer you. And because of, you know, just the processing power that devices provide today, I think you know, you got to really highly optimize your experience. And right now we don't have enough tools out there to debug. So many a times, you know, your app could be sluggish and you don't really know why it's happening. I think that's because we don't have enough instrumentation tools right now. So if I have to just plot this, you know, if I have to plot this and, you know, just as a takeaway, right? Effort versus, you know, user experience, right? I mean, how does it score? I would say that, like, you know, because, you know, you can leverage pretty much everything that the OS lets you leverage. User experience, like you can strive for the best user experience with a native approach if you're kind of like, if you want to be available as a mobile app. In that sense, you know, because you can reuse a lot of, you know, you can reuse a lot of a UI, that's where you cut down on effort. And but I mean, at the same time, the user experience also suffers. So mobile web in that sense would, I mean, compared to a native experience, would be much lower. But on the other side, if I just change this graph a little bit, if you build for mobile web, right, with the least amount of effort, you can get the best reach. So I think, like, I would recommend that, I mean, like, you cannot like disregard a mobile web experience, right? So I think the mobile web experience is a must-have. I think the native comes later on. So I think, like, because people are going to access content, like I said earlier, right? You don't know where people are going to access content. It doesn't make sense. Like, when people are on the go, they're not going to download an app, for example, right? So, like, for example, if you're a publisher, you don't know where your content is being published or shared, right? So your content is being shared on Twitter, it's being shared on, you know, on Facebook. Like, you need to have a web presence and a mobile optimized web presence for that to happen, right? So on that note, I think, I mean, that's it.